Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. It's the first video of 2026, and it's this time of year where we all make promises to ourselves that we know we can't keep. But what a lot of people don't know is that the secret to keeping your resolution is to just make it something you were gonna do anyway, which is why I've pledged to make the world worse. But in addition to making resolutions, it's also time to open our minds to new ideas and experiences. And you know what experience is new to me? LARPing. Yes, the obvious next step up from playing tabletop RPGs and the next step down from being attractive to women. If I'm being perfectly truthful, live-action roleplay has always been on my to-try list. Yeah, I enjoy roleplaying as a goblin at the D&D table, but there's something about the idea of painting myself green and stripping naked apart from a necklace made from the finger bones of my enemies that I feel would really scratch that itch. What itch would that be? Well, that's between me and my therapist to figure out. But despite the inherent draw that LARPing has for me, there are quite a few stories out there that try their best to convince me otherwise. That's right, I got a collection of RPG horror stories for you today about LARPs gone wrong. Because if there's one thing worse than role-playing degeneracy, it's live-action role-playing of degeneracy. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. Story number 1 comes from a deleted user and is titled Larp, the GM's little favorite. Hi guys. Some people under this post were talking about bringing more LARP stories to this sub and reminded me of an aptly horrific experience that I had about a half a year ago. Disclaimer, English is a second language, so I'm sorry if I make mistakes. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Also, sorry if it gets too long. I have a bad tendency of ranting too much. So I'm relatively new to LARPing, but have been to a couple of events. Same goes to most of my friends involved in this story. We had 2 experienced guys on our team. We met them at another LARP about a year before this happened and became friends. Now, the LARP in question has a system where races don't have any specific attributes, but instead are used as teams to coordinate the GMs following around the player groups. For example, we played the orcs, and since we were the only players playing orcs, we were joined by 3 NPCs, and all knew each other besides that. Now, onto the meat. After generic adventuring shenanigans for 2 hours, we managed to get into a fight with the elves. Here came the first problem of Sir Douche. Sir Douche was playing as a random merchant, and only had a dagger, and his character was a very run away from the conflict instead of fighting coward type, because he was recovering from a back injury so didn't want to fight. He wasn't with the elves, he just happened to be there. Me and my friend, who we'll call Boss, just because he's the most experienced LARPer in our group and we decided to elect him as the leader of our orc tribe, were the only ones still alive and good. There was only one elf fighter left, so we focused on him. Sir Douche threw his dagger at me, already rule-breaking since it was not a throwing weapon, but a barely covered wooden one, but whatever, and I blocked it with my shield. Seeing as he had nothing left, I joined Boss in cornering the last elf. This is where Sir Douche decided to grab the halberd of one of our dead teammates and throw it into my back before bolting away. Now, at least in this LARP, grabbing anything from anybody else without their explicit permission is a huge no-no, as it should be. You could break their stuff, you don't know how well each part is coated, how hard you can safely swing it, etc., etc. A perfectly reasonable rule that everybody had to agree to in the beginning of the game. Breaking it supposedly results in a ban from the LARP for life. The halberd clearly had a wooden handle, and without any core, you can't throw the weapon. I know, some people will complain about wooden handles, but they are legal in all the LARPs I've attended in this country, as long as they pass a thorough inspection by the GMs. We use these, quite expensive by the way, handles as just staffs for sparring, and never had a single one break. I personally wouldn't use a wooden core weapon, but the point is the halberd itself was in-game perfectly legally. It hurt like hell when it hit me. Even even through metal armor. It shattered into pieces, and the bottom pointy, splintery, spiky half of the handle was only stopped by my plate armor. The shattering is especially bad. As I mentioned above, these staffs are sturdy as hell, though they are meant for sideways force instead of stabby force. Which is why we never actually use them to thrust, not even carefully, by the way. I called dead, mostly because it hurt so bad. I thought it damaged me seriously. I did signal the GM closest to me, and I was clearly in pain, but she did not stop the game. Boss killed the elf in the meantime, and not seeing any of what happened, bolted after Sir Douche, and touched him lightly on the shoulder. You generally don't charge into someone's back. It's an asshole move, and can hurt like hell with all the momentum, even with a properly foamy weapon. A tap on the shoulder with your axe signifies that you did, in fact, take them out. When he gets back, he sees what happened to the halberd, and he hears me and my friend raging at Sir Douche. The GMs, who have seen all of this, could have stopped all of this at any moment. There were 5 of them present, 3 on our side and 2 on the elves, but they did nothing. Instead, they decided that Boss was dead, and Sir Douche gets to loot him because Boss attacked Douche when Douche was injured in real life and couldn't fight. Yes, he is a good longtime friend of the GM crew, as we learned later. Since this is already way too long, I will cut the story here. There's still more to go before we got to the point we decided to never go back to this LARP ever again. If you guys are interested, I'll put this story up as well. So here we come to one of the main reasons why I think LARPing can turn a lot of people off from giving it a try. A lot of the content in games like D&D is just straight up violence. So translating that into a live-action roleplay in a way that isn't just straight up assault is a bit tricky. Go too far one way and you end up with a bunch of nerds putting themselves in a hospital and the organizers in a courtroom. Go too far the other way and you end up with groups of normies shaking their heads while watching nerds smack each other with pool noodles like they were zoo animals. And personally, I think I would prefer the hospital visits. Look, man, if I can't chant blood for the blood god while doing an activity, I don't want it. But just because I think that medieval MMA looks peak does not mean the appeal is gonna be there for everyone. You gotta strike a balance, which I imagine isn't easy to do. And that's assuming that you don't have f***wits who just straight up ignore the rules because they know that favoritism is gonna protect them. Sir Douche using his back injury as an excuse to physically assault other people is the equivalent of saying, "You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would you, after you hit them over the head with a bottle?" Homie's only gonna be able to keep that up for so long before someone says, "I'll show you a back injury," and banes them over their knee. But wouldn't you know it, my tendency to distrust authority rings true once again. Because we got a spiritual part 2 to this story, and it turns out the organizers are the real horror story here. Part 2 is titled LARP, When the Story Must End the Right Way. Hi guys, I'm the one who posted about Sir Douche and having a halberd thrown into my back at a LARP. This story plays out after what's in that post, but it's not necessary to read that one. Also, English is my second language, etc., you know the drill. Also, sorry if this becomes too long, but I feel like some exposition is unfortunately necessary. So, for a little bit of context, we are playing a LARP where races are basically used as teams. Me and some of my friends play as orcs, which is the problem race with this LARP. You see, although the story is as generic as you can get every year, orcs are always pitted against everyone else, which means that there are 3 teams actively trying to kill you. And one that is kind of neutral, but obviously doesn't want to oppose the good guys. Couple that with the fact that most orcs are newer players, since the orc dress code is by far the easiest to follow, and that most of the GM's friends play as humans, and it's pretty shit to be an orc. You can see from my last post that the GMs are not exactly unbiased. So we never really care about the main story since we orcs never really have a chance to win it. Our goal this year is to basically hoard as much gold as possible and maybe help the new Dark Elf race with the main plot, if they get close to win as the bad guy's side. So the story this year is this. Magical very good tree has some disease. Only way to cure it is to get 3 healing runes and perform a ritual before sundown or it will be too late. But the evil team can gather 3 different runes and use those to kill the tree instantly. They advertise multiple endings every year heavily, even though it's only a debriefing speech in the end about who won, but hey, it's still cool. Every team got some NPCs to follow around with them, and we had 3. Now, it's important to note that while these guys are GMs and have some kind of authority in the world, they are regular orcs. We elected my friend Boss in the previous story as the leader of our orc gang, but pretty much voted on what we wanted to do every time. So on to the story finally. Our NPCs really wanted us to fight the humans, but since there were at least 2 times as many of them as us, we instead skedaddled away into the forest and got up to orc shenanigans, looting random tents and chests, getting killed by magical traps, trying to find elves to kill, the usual. Through all this, we managed to acquire 3 runes, 2 of the harming ones and 1 healing one. Now you do need to note that at this point, we didn't know about the runes, only that the tree was dying. It's actually the best thing about this LARP that the story is revealed in segments, and a lot of the random MacGuffins are not obvious as to what their purpose is immediately. We went back to the bar, the only non-combat area, and actually managed to get there without getting killed on sight, by outrunning a bunch of dwarves who couldn't catch us in their heavy armor. There, our GMs, again, tried to convince us to sell the healing rune to the elves, since we could buy beers from that money. Now, this seemed reasonable for some dumb orcs, but we figured that since we had more money than anyone else combined anyway, we might as well keep it till we figure out what it's used for. Later, we got into a lot of fights, and our dark elf allies bailed on us, so we hunted them down for a little revenge. Now, when we get killed, we can be looted, so all enemies could have taken the runes from us. I was voted to be the mule and carried all our stuff, which was very funny according to my dear orc tribe. I didn't hide the rune, because you shouldn't. It was obviously an in-game artifact, and none of the airhead humans actually took it. They just took my money every time. So after more shenanigans, we finally discovered the purpose of the runes, and that the dwarves have all 3 runes that are not ours. So they had 2 healing and 1 destroying one. Our GMs tried to convince us to fight them, so we can do the destruction ritual with the 3 destruction runes and win the game. We decided not to do that, since it would basically be a suicide mission. There would be more of them and better armed. Instead, we went full guerrilla, hiding in the forest and mugging smaller groups for an hour and a half until sundown. So debriefing time came, and we went back to the pub, smug as a bug on a rug because we had won the game, something that hadn't happened to the bad side since about 6 or 7 years. That's when the dog poo hit the fan. You see, since the dwarves have beaten us in battle once, true, they joined the humans and outnumbered us 6 or 7 to 30, we actually managed to bring down all but 4 of them because we used tactics more sophisticated than charge. But because they had beaten us that one time, they technically could have looted the runes from us. I said, yeah, but they didn't though. The rule is anything they don't take remains with you when you respawn. It's even courtesy to leave enough gold with somebody when looting them so they can still buy a meal in the pub. It's not a rule, but a courtesy nonetheless. After some shouting matches, it was ruled that they did in fact loot the rune from us, and thus the ritual was completed and the goodies won again. Before you ask, all it affected was the debriefing speech at the end, no secret boss fight or something, and the story is not continuous between the years. So giving us, the bad guys, the win for once would not have changed anything. But I guess the head organizers love playing elves and humans so much that they literally rotate who has to play on the evil side every year. After all of this, one of our GMs wrote a long, snarky Facebook post in our country's biggest LARP group about how we were all not interested in the story at all, and were just fucking around the whole game. My only satisfaction is that she was shut down so heavily by the dwarf team's leader, who actually recognized that they fucked up by not taking the runes from us, and even stood up against the ruling at the game, and is on the organizer team of the biggest and best LARP in this country. The GM deleted her post hours after. So this is why we never went to any LARP organized by these guys ever again. They even invited me to another event in the same world, which is more roleplay heavy, because they needed an NPC who could play a hustler/gambler cheat. I do magic tricks as a hobby, and my party trick at LARPs is betting people gold on common card games, then cheating the hell out of it, like dealing them empty cards in poker or making all the cards turn black at 3-card Monty. I replied with a screenshot of the aforementioned GM's rant, and I have not heard from them since. End of story. Holy nepotism, Batman! At this point, why even have orcs in your game if you're just gonna rewrite events as if they don't exist? I've heard rumors that LARPs tend to get really cliquey, but damn, this just sounds like an awful time all around. What really sucks is that they turned the bad guy team into a complete afterthought at best and an excuse to pick on newbies at the worst. If I'm ever given the choice, I will always choose to play the bad guy. I collect Tyranids in Warhammer, I main Killer in Dead by Daylight, and I'm a forever GM because I like to mad scientist homebrew monsters for my players to stab. I choose to play the bad guy because it's a win-win scenario for me. If I win the game, well, I win the game. It's not exactly rocket science there. But if I lose the game, I still had fun because I got to bring to life an unstoppable force that the heroes get the satisfaction of overcoming in a narratively satisfying way. That's fun for me because who doesn't like to see evil getting dunked on? The only way I could see my win-win philosophy around playing the bad guy get turned into a lose-lose is if it turns into something like this. I don't get the satisfaction of winning because, well, I'm not allowed to win. And my opponent doesn't get the satisfaction of overcoming an unstoppable force because I was neutered so hard to the point of becoming comically stoppable. For someone to take pride in dealing with a threat, the threat has to be threatening. Pulling this kind of rug pull doesn't only do a disservice to the people playing as the bad guys, but also to the LARP as a whole. If I were playing as a dwarf, why would I give a shit about what happens if I know I'm gonna be handed the win no matter how terribly I play? And if I were a new player who got thrown onto a team outnumbered 5-1 and still got the W, only to have my victory retconned, in what world would I want to come back next year and give you my money? Plus, if I'm not given an outlet to fulfill my bad guy fantasies, I will be forced to go find one, and I will not be held responsible for my actions. Our third and final story comes from Reddit user Ye Olde Wild and is titled My First and Last LARP Session. This happened when I was just starting college when I was about 18 or 19 years old. I've never been a social person, and making friends has always been hard for me. So one of my objectives was to find a group of like-minded people, aka nerds, to form a group and hang out. This happened rather sooner than I expected, and before I knew it, I was hanging out with a group of 4. King, Queen, Jack, and myself. King had a background as a longtime role-playing veteran and overall fantasy nerd with a particular fixation on Tolkien. Queen was a metalhead with a thing for Vikings and Norse mythology, while Jack was an older guy who enjoyed poetry and the theatrical arts. I, for my part, had some experience playing vampire and werewolf and enjoyed role-playing in video games, especially MMOs, but I was not familiar with D&D at all. Despite the fact we hung out together in classes and in between them, we really didn't know much about each other. We all came from different backgrounds and had bonded together simply because we had some shared interests, but that was it. Calling ourselves friends was a stretch at this point, which is why it took me by surprise when King invited all of us to participate in a LARP session that he was organizing with another group of friends of his. I was hesitant, but seeing as Jack and Queen were going, I decided to tag along. Now, at that point, I had not even a remote idea of what LARPing was all about. It was explained to me very briefly, but when the bus came to pick us up to take us to our destination, I still had many unanswered questions. Things immediately took a turn for the worse when I realized that Jack had bailed on the whole affair, and it was just Queen, King, myself, and like 20 other people I had never seen in my entire life inside a bus heading to God knows where. Of course, they all knew each other from years ago and were having a good time joking and catching up. Meanwhile, King had promptly taken Queen to his side as her guest and introduced her to the rest of the gang, leaving me aside to endure the 2-hour-long ride by myself. I felt nothing but anxiety the entire time and couldn't utter a word to anyone, and no one approached me either. When we finally arrived, I was alone amongst a sea of people. I had no idea where I was or what I was supposed to do. That's when King explained the game to us. We were supposed to play pre-assigned characters during an entire day and night cycle, around 24 hours, each with their own agendas and objectives. The idea was to achieve our respective goals, and during the morning of the next day, tally up the results to determine the winning faction and character. Now, this was more up my alley, and I immediately felt determined to play my character as best I could. However, when I received my sheet, I was kind of conflicted. My character was a thief, or not even a thief, he was more of a peasant that wanted to steal something of value from the king. You can imagine who played him, to enrich himself and his band of rogues. The band in question was composed of 3 other people that knew each other, but I didn't know at all. So they decided to work together and ignore the fact that I was also part of their faction. I was, again, left alone to try and harvest some fun out of this whole thing. I tried to track down Queen, but it turned out she was also part of King's entourage, so there was no approaching her without angering the guards. I realize now that I need to describe the play arena so you can get an idea of where everyone was located. Imagine a circle of around 20 meters of diameter of flat land in the middle of a field surrounded by a thick pine forest. On the northern part of a circle was the tent of the royals, aka King, Queen, and a couple of others, which was guarded by 2 guards at all times. On the eastern and western parts of the circle were smaller tents with different equipments and the players' belongings, and in the middle was a sort of open area with logs and an improvised campfire to roleplay interactions among the players. It wasn't a very big arena, and it was quite awkward to move around because you ended up bumping into people simply by moving from one spot to another. Seeing as I had no teammates and my IRL friends were roleplaying f***ing each other's brains out, I decided to pursue my own agenda on my own, which basically translated to me stealing a jewel from the king's tent and fence it with another player to pocket some nifty profit. Easy enough. I snuck past the guards and crawled under the tent, making sure that I had not been spotted by the guards or the people outside. I was about to start snooping around when I heard someone approaching from the front. I pocketed some valuables, but when I was about to sneak out, I heard, "Stop or perish, fool!" It was King. He had caught me red-handed. I roleplayed some excuse, got on my knees, and I begged for his forgiveness, trying to play the whole "my wife is so sick" card. But King, being the petty asshole he always was, decided to call the guards anyway and make an example out of me. "Chop his head off for everyone to see," he demanded with a shit-eating grin. The guards obeyed and kicked me out of the tent, kicking and screaming for my life. They then improvised a chopping block with a stump in the middle of the arena, and before you knew it, I was dead. I had played a grand total of 23 minutes. At this point, it was important to mention that the game was supposedly hardcore, meaning no magic and no resurrections were allowed. If you were killed, that was it. You were out. Of course, seeing as the theme of the game was mostly about subterfuge and politics, there really wasn't much of a chance for anyone to get killed at all. So much so, in fact, that I was the only one who died. The organizers hadn't anticipated that this would happen, so they asked King what to do with my limp body, and he simply said, "Throw it to the pigs," which meant, "Leave him inside one of the tents." After that, I don't know how much time passed, because I fell asleep. I could faintly hear people playing, moving about, and laughing, but I was just so tired of it all that I simply dozed off, covered by cots that didn't belong to me. At some point, a couple of girls came into the tent, made an improvised ritual over my head, and said I was free to live again, and then left. I saw them leave and proceeded to continue sleeping. What finally woke me up was hunger and being cold. That's when I realized that it was nighttime and I had slept for the best part of the day. I scurried out of the tent just in time to see the game crumble under its own pretentiousness. You see, apparently there were supposed to be monster attacks during the night, but people were so tired and hungry that they didn't really care about the monsters and ended up inviting them to eat at the camp, which the monsters promptly accepted, thus shattering the whole illusion. King was furious that his event had been hijacked, and I saw him berate his staff in front of everyone. But in the end, he had no choice but to accept it. People were drinking beer and playing with foam swords. I timidly approached the main campfire to find Queen completely drunk, singing some weird song in a language I didn't understand. She saw me, greeted me, and handed me a plate with bread and some meat, which I devoured instantly. I spent the next hours lip-syncing to songs I didn't know, surrounded by people too drunk to care about my existence. This was probably the highlight of the entire trip, to be quite frank. Also, at some point I got up, grabbed a foam sword, and dueled with another guy that went all Naruto on me. We exchanged blows, but I hit him in the head a little too hard, and people gave me the stink eye for not being a good sport. I didn't give a shit, it felt pretty good. The next morning I was ready to leave and never come back. I was tired, my body was sore, I was cold, and I had eaten very little. When they announced the winners of the game, take a fat guess who the deserving champion was. Why, of course, King and Queen. People clapped, but I don't know if it was truly sincere. When the bus was about to arrive, King asked me if I had enjoyed the session. I looked at him in the eye and told him, "You killed me on the first hour." He paused for a second, looked around, and then laughed it off as if what I had said was a joke. What a dick, I muttered as he went into the bus. On the ride back, Queen sat by my side and apologized for leaving me behind. But she simply had so much fun that she forgot about me. I shrugged and told her that she wasn't my mom, so she shouldn't feel guilty. She asked me if I wanted to return for another session. Fuck no, I simply said as I put on my headphones and drifted away from this miserable experience. TLDR, I try to take part in a LARP session to bond with new friends and end up feeling lonelier than ever. End of story. Oh god. As a socially awkward individual myself, this sounds like a nightmare. Fun fact, whenever I'm hanging out with a group of people, I have this intrusive thought where I say to myself, if these people were told that they had to tell one person here to leave or the world would explode, they would all definitely choose me. Which is total bullshit, by the way, because that's straight up not how people really think. That being said, I can't imagine not thinking like that after being treated like this. Real talk, it's pretty common knowledge that hobbies like D&D, TTRPGs, and LARPing tend to attract people who, well, let's just say need some help adjusting to some social climates. So in addition to balancing an environment between hospitals and pool noodles, you're really gonna have to put in the legwork to make sure people feel welcomed in a space where you're encouraged to put yourself out there. RPGs, and I imagine LARPing especially, involves a bit of vulnerability because you're putting yourself into a position that most people would consider at least a little silly. So basically being told to just figure it out on your own, yeah, that kinda sucks. And King here? Yeah, that's not very kingly behavior from this guy. I gotta agree with our OP here. What a dick. I don't think it's a controversial take that the enjoyment of the players should come well before the authenticity of your roleplay. Bro knew that he's basically responsible for dragging OP out into the middle of the forest and assigning him a role that isolates them from anyone they know. So the least he could do is let OP attempt to stumble their way into some fun, but nope. King said to himself, "Oh man, you know what would be super fun for this person? If I manufactured a scenario where they literally were not allowed to leave their tent. Hell yeah, I am such a good game master." This goes for pretty much any role-playing activity, but at some point you gotta remember that the monster you're fighting isn't just a monster to be slain. That's Jeff from accounting. And he's only got this one weekend of PTO he can use to keep himself from going insane. So maybe doing something guaranteed to ruin his fun is not the correct move. At least Queen had the decency to apologize and know that she messed up, and while yes, OP is right that it is not her responsibility to babysit him, it's still the decent thing for you to not only prioritize your own experience when you know damn well it's coming at the sake of someone else's. I'm sorry that happened to you, OP, and I hope that you're able to find some people you click with better than King and Queen. But you know what I always click with? Fan art! That's right, let's take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer Ultimate Chaos Potato, who has made a comic depicting the Drake's relentless quest for cringe.
I'll tell you what, I like your cringe, I want your cringe. Now we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The choice is yours.
No, please! Not my for-real detective number 69! Senpai, please, has mercy! Yamate! Ah!
Where's the cringe? Where's the cringe? Thank you again, Ultimate Chaos Potato, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section, or upload it to the official Den of the Drake subreddit linked in the description. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the stories over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon, merchandise, and Gamer Subs affiliate links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake. Pathetic fool! You believe you stand a chance against the king himself? I will cut you down, but only after I read these patron names. Dracor, Karam Archivols, Cam the Badger, Bro Tater Tot, Soul Taker 666212, Gobshite, Ziggy Diggy 00, Miridel Bell, Curistor, Miramotau, and Matthew Mulqueenie. Now prepare to face my blade. Oh, damn it! The stupid katana broke again. The guy at the mall said the glue would hold this time. Hey, if you're still here, YouTube thinks you would like this video, and since I'm not biased at all, well, I'd have to agree. Come on, click it.